Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all of you participants from around, I wouldn't know if around the world, but from all over different time zones, the United States. Thank you so much for joining. Our virtual tour today it's a real big virtual tour. We're going to be jumping all over the planet. This is called Two Shimons in a Cave, and the basic story is the Lag BaOmer story. But the Lag BaOmer story, which was basically Saturday night, Sunday of this past week, the 33rd day of the Omer count between Pesach, Shavuot, Passover, and Tabernacles, and it's a celebration with bonfires all over the country. And as an Israeli, I'm going to give you the insider perspective about it, but that basically there are two very different parts to this holiday that never meet. There is Shimon Bar Yochai, which is the more religious side of Lag BaOmer. So the great student of Rabbi Akiva, was often associated with Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah, but I'm going to go over that towards the end a little bit. But he is one side of Lag BaOmer because his day of passing, he passed away on Lag BaOmer according to Jewish tradition, and he wanted people to celebrate his passing and not mourn him. So there's bonfires and there's all kinds of other reasons for that. They celebrate in Meron in the Galilee, which is where he's buried. And the other side of Bar Kokhva, and the other side of Lag BaOmer that has to do also with bonfires is Bar Kokhva, the Bar Kokhva rebellion, the Bar Kokhva revolt, which is the largest revolt in Jewish history, which also led to a tremendous disaster. And I'm going to be talking mostly about that because that's the most unknown of the two. And many Israelis, mostly the secular side, celebrate Bar Kokhva, and they go out and shoot bows and arrows and talk about bonfires and rebellions against the Roman. Nothing to do with Shimon Bar Yochai. These two Jewish leaders who faced the Romans and hid from the Romans in caves and have a lot to do with bows and arrows and caves, and they're both named Shimon. These are the two sides of Lag BaOmer, and my hope is that by the end of this virtual tour, we'll be able to say, let's let the two Shimons come out of the cave and embrace like the brothers that they are. So that's what we're going to be exploring. So I'm going to start with the main characters, and then we're going to go to the locations. We're going to have a bit of a crash course on who are these people, where are we? Some people know them more, some people know them less. I want to make sure that at least we know the main characters. So let's begin with Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was a Jewish leader, a spiritual leader, who is connected to both Shimon Bar Yochai and Shimon Bar Kokhva. He was the rabbi and supporter of both. And he was also kind of anti-Roman. He was actually killed as a result of the Bar Kokhva revolt, and we'll get into that later. But he had a tremendous amount of influence on Jewish history. He's compared to Moshe Rabbeinu, to Moses, in terms of passing on the Torah, enabling Jews to survive through their learning. There's a lot to talk about and unpack about Rabbi Akiva. We're not getting into that today. Maybe in some future classes we'll talk about Rabbi Akiva. The only thing I'll mention about him is that he went from rags to riches, and when he was very poor, he promised his wife Rachel, who was disowned by her very wealthy father for marrying this poor, uneducated shepherd, but she believed in him, and he promised her that one day we're going to make it, we're going to have money, we're going to be well off, and on that day I'm going to buy you a Jerusalem of gold, a Yerushalayim shel Zahav. This was the inspiration for the very famous song, Yerushalayim shel Zahav, a Jerusalem of gold. So you know about Rabbi Akiva, even if you don't know that story, you know about him indirectly. So he's a major player who we're going to talk about. His first student who we're going to mention who hid in the cave and is connected to Lag BaOmer is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, which means Shimon, the son of Yochai. He's known by his initials, the acronym Rashbi, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So everybody knows Rashbi, and you're going to see that later. This is an image on the right of basically the representation of Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah, which is like the secretive stuff. So like in a cave, there's a lot of associations. It's taken from the Knesset menorah outside the Knesset, and I'm going to talk about that later. I'm just going to show it to you because it's cool. The other student of Rabbi Akiva, who Rabbi Akiva supported, is Shimon Bar Kokhva, and that's him in the image also from the Knesset menorah. His actual name was only discovered about 70 years ago. We're going to get into that story. but he's known in Jewish sources as Ben Kosva or Ben Koziba. It's only later that the word Kokhva, which means star, Kochav, was sort of stuck to his name because he was a star. He was kind of a superstar. He was a leader. He was a very important character in leading the Jewish revolt against the Romans. People thought he's the real deal. He's like the ultimate Jewish leader, the Mashiach, the Messiah. Like that's what they thought about him at the time. So we're going to get into that later. And finally, our villain. Our villain is the Roman Emperor Hadrian, Hadrianos. We're going to talk about him a lot. You're going to get to know him. You're going to see some really cool stuff about him. But without further ado, let's get into the story. All right. So our story begins with the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. We are going to Rome. I hope you recognize Rome, the big boot that stepped over Judea and Israel and destroyed the temple in Jerusalem in the year 70. And that happened 65 years before the Bar Kokhva revolt. But there's a reason that I'm going to go into Rome first. I would like to show you what the Romans did to commemorate the destruction of Jerusalem, because this is a very big event in Roman history. It's called the Roman-Jewish Wars. And the first one is the Great Revolt, which ended in the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. And the second one is the Bar Kokhva revolt, which is by far larger. So this area in Italy, in Rome, is known as the Roman Forum. There's a lot of ancient Roman buildings here. I'm sure you know the building in the center. This is called the Colosseum. The Colosseum is kind of an arena in which gladiators would fight to the death. Basically, slaves would be forced to fight to the death just for the Roman entertainment. And we know that both the arena was built by the spoils from Jerusalem, and the people entertaining the Romans in it were Jews as well. We know that for a fact. We were sold as slaves, as gladiators, so that's a big part of it. But here's the main part: this victory arch. Now, if you've been to Brooklyn, I'm sure you've seen in Washington Square, there's a victory arch. It's a concept that comes from the Roman world, but the Romans built victory arches to commemorate great achievements. And this one was built by Titus, who I also have here as a rubber duck. The Emperor Titus, at the time he was the commander of the army, he destroyed Jerusalem, and later on he and his brother Domitian built this arch. And this arch is there to commemorate, to celebrate the destruction of Jerusalem and the conquest of Judea. It was a very big deal in the Roman world, and this arch shows you the menorah, and there's a picture of it in color here on the side, so you get the idea. This shows Roman soldiers dressed up in celebration, carrying off the gold and silver vessels from the temple in Jerusalem. So that's a story that I cover in a different tour, but I want you at least to see this, because there are other victory arches that relate to Hadrian and Bar Kokhva that many people don't know about. So I'd like to show them to you, but we're first going to continue talking about the temple. So let's go into Jerusalem. We are in the Israel Museum. This is known as the Holy Land model of Jerusalem because it used to be in the Holy Land Hotel. It's now in the Israel Museum, but it's famous as Holy Land. It's just what we call it. It's a model that shows you the second temple at the peak of its glory, right before the destruction, the Antonia fortress that was built to protect it, and the 3 different walls that are surrounding Jerusalem. It's an incredible city. And I want to show you where we're standing. We are looking at the Israeli parliament in the background. This is the Knesset, this flat building. This kind of white macaroon shape with sprinklers on it is known as the Shrine of the Book, which currently is closed because of the war, and all of the very precious ancient documents that are in it are inside the new Antiquities Authority across the street. It's like they're deep underground, protected. That's the current situation. So this is what Jerusalem looked like before it was destroyed. But 65 years or 60 years before our story of the Bar Kokhva rebellion, the Bar Kokhva revolt, this was destroyed. It's laid in ruin. That's what's going on currently as far as our timeline is concerned. So Jerusalem has been destroyed. The Jewish people are humiliated. Everybody in the Roman Empire knows about this because there's a special series of Roman coins that talk about it, that talk about the destruction of Judea. So again, a story for another time. And of course, everybody knows the Arch of Titus and the Colosseum. So they made a very big deal about this. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the Romans. I'm going to jump before I jump into the Israel Museum and talk about real Roman army gear and weapons and all kinds of other cool things that were found in Israel from the Roman period, I want to jump across the street right next to the Knesset and show you that menorah that I'm talking about because it's worthwhile being familiar with. So here's the Knesset. We're basically in Givat Ram, which is like the Israeli version of Capitol Hill, Washington, D.C. So all the government, public offices and buildings and museums are here, and university, the Hebrew University. And this is known as the Knesset menorah because it's outside the Knesset. This menorah was given to Israel as a gift by the British government, and it's got an amazing story behind it. But every single square here has a 3D image related to Jewish history, about 67 images and verses, and it's all over from every single side. I just can't get a really good image. Let's see if I could move around a little bit. Sort of, kind of. Can't really get behind it. But these are the images that I used in my cover. Now let's go into the museum. So inside the Israel Museum, we have, it says here, under Roman rule. And I must say that we've reached a milestone. Here it is. This milestone actually mentions Emperor Vespasian, who was the emperor who destroyed the temple. And there's a lot of other things here. There's the Hadrian, there's the Bar Kokhva revolt. We're going to visit some of these things. This emperor, this is an incredible story, and I'm going to share with you something that has to do with beeswax in just a moment. It's a special exhibition in the Israel Museum. I'll show it to you soon. This is a bronze statue of the emperor that was found in Israel. I'll show you who found it. This was found in Israel, which is quite incredible. This is Emperor Hadrian, the emperor who destroyed Jerusalem and renamed Israel. We're going to get into that story a little bit later. So this is him. And all around us are things related to the Bar Kokhva revolt. So this picture of a city being plowed is actually the establishment of reestablishing of Jerusalem. I'm going to show this to you soon in a video, in an excellent video. It's a 10-minute long video, so we're just going to skip around and see parts of it, but I'm going to send you the link. It's an amazing video, the best one on the topic that I have seen, and I've seen a lot of them. It just came out. It's brand new. So this shows you the special ceremony that the Romans would do when they dedicate a new city is they basically plow the city, and then they make a new city. And Emperor Hadrian wanted to rebuild Jerusalem. Now imagine, the Jews are devastated all over the world. The temple was destroyed. We've lost our honor. And a new emperor comes along and says, I'm going to rebuild Jerusalem. How is everybody feeling? They're excited. They're exuberant. But instead of rebuilding Jerusalem, Hadrian decided to bury Jerusalem and build on top of it a city for Jupiter, or Zeus, which is just the Roman version of Zeus. That didn't go too well, and that's the reason for the Bar Kokhva revolt. It was such a knife to the heart of the Jews that they just got out, and it was the largest revolt in Jewish history, and one of the biggest ones also in Roman history. It's a very big deal, okay? So I'm going to get into this a little bit, and also pointing out that all of these treasures behind glass were actually carried to caves when the Jews were hiding from the Romans. And these are their valuables. There's weapons. Let's get a little bit closer. There's treasures of all sorts here. There's mirrors. There's this is mirrors and women's jewelry. There are letters that were found here. These bent things with handles are actually keys. They locked the door and took the key with them. Glass was as valuable as gold sometimes. These are glass plates that were found in the caves that Bar Kokhva's rebels hidden. And this purple yarn is actually a fake purple dye, but they didn't know it was a fake. We used microscopes to figure out it's a fake. but they thought it was very expensive, so they hid it with them. And we also found tefillin, tzitzit, all kinds of other interesting things.
If he destroyed Israel, then how's Israel still there?
Very good question. We'll get to that. Okay, we've been destroyed several times, and here we are, right? But we're going to talk about that, and we're going to get into a few more things. I want to show you one more thing, and then we'll talk about the overview. There behind us on this wall we're not actually looking at the beach. There's no beach in Jerusalem, but it's a picture of the aqueduct, which is a pipeline, basically a Roman pipeline from Caesarea, which is a very famous Roman city. And these two stones there, which today are not on display, they switched the display to something else. These were written by Hadrian to tell you that he fixed and renovated the aqueduct in the city of Caesarea. This is going to be very important for us. So I want to first take you to Caesarea, and then we'll do a bit more of our overview. So here's the actual city of Caesarea, which is a very popular Roman city. Look, they have a theater here. We can actually jump in if you want to see. Let's pick a random spot in the theater. I've been to, what do you call it? I've been to concerts there. It's a very famous, here, these are the seats, the bleachers, and you see they're setting up. Actually, one of my homeschool students in Israel, his father works on sound equipment. So they've been to a lot of shows here. So everybody comes here for shows, but this used to be a place where the Romans would have theater and gladiators and plays and all kinds of stuff. So this is the Roman theater, and this is the aqueduct. What is this straight line? What is an aqueduct? An aqueduct is a pipeline. It brings water into the city so that more people can drink water. Now, the way that they make it today is kind of like, I like to compare this between Israel and America. In Israel, the phone lines are underground. In America, they're all up there, like over the streets. So that's like the pipelines in the Roman Empire. The pipes were on top of arches so that they don't block traffic, but they efficiently bring water from far away into the city. This is the pipeline. Some of you might be familiar with a very famous song called The Walk to Caesarea, which was written by the Jewish Hungarian soldier. Her name is Chana Senesh. It goes, Eli, Eli, Shelo Yigamer Leolam. It's a very famous Israeli song. She wrote the song before going to Hungary in World War II, and she was actually captured by the Nazis and killed there. Chana Senesh. So she was actually in Kibbutz Dot Yam, which is right here, and she walked on the beach of Caesarea, and this is where she wrote the song. So it's a very iconic place. So this is a little bit about the Romans. Let's get into where we are in time. Okay, Rome, the Roman Empire. Every image in this picture you should be familiar with. This is the Colosseum, the aqueduct, and behind us the Arch of Titus. Now, the Roman Empire at this time rules pretty much everything all around the Mediterranean Sea. That's what we're looking at. The white in the center is the Mediterranean. And the northern border of the Roman Empire is Britain, Britannia, England. This is connected to Hadrian. If you go to Britain and ask any British person about Hadrian, they're going to tell you about Hadrian's Wall, which is the northern border of the empire. We're going to go there soon. This is the picture from the Arch of Titus that I showed you beforehand. And now let's talk about sort of where we are today. So the destruction on Jerusalem, the siege on Jerusalem. This is miniature models from the Heichal Shlomo dioramas. It's basically these miniature models. You could see them freely. They're in Jerusalem. I like to include them in my more recent tours. But it's really cool. You see the catapults and these big towers that the Romans built to bring up to the wall. It's a tiny little thing. It's a tiny little 3D model. The destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, it's colloquially known as the Churban, which means the destruction. So the destruction, there's the first and the second temple. This is a very famous painting by Francesco Hayes. You see the menorah on the bottom left being stolen and Roman soldiers, and the whole thing's a disaster. Now, a personal story, which I think I shared some of this in the last tour where we talked about different stories of Jerusalem. My parents' house is built on top of the destruction of the Roman Empire, and we found this in our basement. This is a small clay oil lamp from the First Temple period, and the ashes inside it are from a Jewish home that was destroyed during the Second Temple. So this is in my parents' house.
And why are the soldiers, whatever they are, falling from the wall?
This is basically the battle in Jerusalem continued to take place on the temple. We were fighting with our bodies against the Romans to defend the temple. So these are even civilians just came to block the Romans. Now, this is a story of the Second Temple destruction. I'm sort of just bringing us up to speed. So I can't get into it now. We will have more programs about this later, but I want to talk about the Roman army so you realize what we're fighting against. This is what Bar Kokhva was up against. So the Roman army, it was the most organized and formidable army in the ancient world. They had steel, which is not so easy to get. So they had incredible armor. They were a very, very disciplined army, and they had battle formations that you just could not do anything against. They would just march forward. And I found hundreds of pictures on Pinterest. That's like the best place to look for it. But you could just look in Google Images as well. Roman battle formations. They're quite something. Now the Roman soldiers weren't only fighters. They were builders. And in times of peace, they built roads, they built houses. So the basic idea of the Roman Empire was, if you fight us, you're going to regret it. But if you support us and pay your taxes, you will have peace. And this is called Pax Romana. Pax means peace in Latin, the Roman peace. And the basic idea of the Roman Empire was, if you go along with the empire and you don't rebel, you pay your taxes, we will build beautiful buildings and water fountains. They call them nymphaeums, like they're all over at Rome. You see them. We will make entertainment. We will bring you the finest fabrics that you could dress in, dishes, and all kinds of things that you usually can't get unless you're very rich. But under the Pax Romana, you will have access to it. So all we ask is that you don't rebel. Now, part of the package deal was, well, you also gotta pay, pay tribute and honor the Roman emperors and the Roman gods. That's idolatry. And that did not go too well with the Jews, and the Romans didn't really appreciate the Jewish view of things, like this day of rest and the Sabbath and one God that you can't see. Like, they didn't like that. So they did have kind of an antagonism to these Jewish weirdos who don't eat certain things and they don't do, like, it was weird to them. And that has a lot to do with the Great Revolt, like things that led up to a lot of clashes between the Jews and the Romans when they were here. But again, that's a story for another time. What I'd like to do is I'm going to show you a video. But really quickly, before I show you this amazing video, I see that there's also questions, but hold on. I want to introduce the villain. So we're talking about the emperor who's known as Publius Aelius Trajanus Hadrianus, but let's shorten his name to Hadrian. Now, Hadrian, I'm just going to mention, first of all, what he did. So Emperor Hadrian, in world history, he's known as one of the 5 good emperors because he did a lot of good things for the empire. But in Jewish history, we say, may his bones be crushed to dust, because we hate him for what he's done to us. And we'll talk about what he's done to us. One of the things he did is rename Jerusalem Aelia Capitolina. Aelia is his second name, Publius Aelius Trajanus Hadrianus, except we call him Hadrian for short. And Capitolina means the capital, like one of the capital gods, meaning Zeus. So that's basically him. Now, that statue that was found in Israel was found by this guy on the left, who unfortunately did not get, cool picture, he did not get any credit for finding the statue because he wasn't an archaeologist, and it was a little bit illegal for using a metal detector. But Morty Leventhal, that was his name, he found it, and his niece sent me this picture. And because he didn't get any credit for it, they call him Uncle Nobody, which is kind of a joke, okay? Now, if you visit the Israel Museum today, you're going to see a very cool exhibit, which is called The Emperor and the Bees. So I'll tell you about this exhibit. First of all, the way they made the statue is what's called the vanishing wax technique, which basically means you make the statue out of wax, so it's easy to, make all the impressions on the face and the details, and then you make like a frame around that wax, and then you pour the molten bronze into the frame, and the wax vanishes, it melts away. So it's called the vanishing wax technique. Not there's like a secret about the wax. It just sounds kind of cool. So what this artist, this European artist, Thomas Libertini, did is he basically used a 3D printer to make an image of the face of Hadrian, and he put that inside a beehive, and the bees made a wax face of Hadrian, and there's two of them. And they're in the museum now. You can see this with the statues of the wax, and a whole video showing you how they made the beeswax, the beehive, in the shape of Hadrian's face. So it's now, it just opened up about a month ago. It's now on display in the Israel Museum, and it's just kind of cool, you know, like it doesn't mean, yeah, it's cool. Okay. What do I see? There's some questions in the chat. Beekeepers, that's so cool. So one of my homeschool students in Israel, his grandfather was the beekeeper who did this. So it's kind of cool, and they were on my virtual tour where I spoke about this. So it's kind of cool. Yeah, it's really cool when you appreciate this. I also just watched the movie The Beekeeper, but that has nothing to do with this. I was just very curious about it. So he built the aqueduct, and for the adults in the crowd, I'm going to just pay homage to Monty Python. So what have the Romans ever done for us? You know this? The aqueduct. What? You know, they gave us the aqueduct. Yes, they did give us that. That's true. And sanitation, yes, that too. The aqueduct, I'll grant, is one thing the Romans have done, and roads. Now they're all new, and the great wines too. Well, apart from the wines and fermentation and the canals and navigation, public health and all for all the nations, apart from those which are a plus, what have the Romans ever done for us? So the adults will get this reference. It's for the kids. It's a movie that's basically about the Great Revolt. It's kind of funny, but that's about it. Okay. Now let's. I want to show you one thing about Hadrian, and then I'm gonna share with you this amazing, amazing movie. We're gonna watch parts of it. So. One thing on the way to England, which I forgot to mention, I was going to show you, but I just learned about it today, is in Greece. This is Hadrian's Arch in Greece. I just learned about it today. I sat around in Google Earth and I found it in like 10 seconds. So here it is. So Hadrian built arches all over the place. And now we're going to actually continue on our way to Britain. Hadrian's Wall. And here it is. You can see it from a sky view. It's very long. It's tens of miles long. I think it might be over 100 miles long. This entire thing is Hadrian's Wall. Let's take a closer look at it. In fact, I'll even do this. Hadrian's Wall. Now, this is the northern border of the empire. And basically what Hadrian did is he said, we are no longer conquering other nations or expanding. We're consolidating. It's a good thing. And that's why he's known as one of the 5 good emperors. This shows up in a lot of movies, of course, but it's very famous, Hadrian's Wall. Of course, it was bigger, but you know, this is what remains of it today. It's a tourist site. You can go see it in the north of England. So that's kind of cool. Now let's get into our story. We are going to talk about the Bar Kokhva revolt. The first of the 2 students of Rabbi Akiva, and his path is known as the path of the sword. Later on, we're going to get into the path of the spirit. That's Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Without further ado, let's see the movie.
More than 500,000 people slaughtered, religious persecution, entire regions in ruins. Hadrian was an enlightened emperor. He loved music and philosophy, built beautiful cities, and was known as a peace-loving ruler. So what infuriated him so much that almost 2,000 years ago, he marched half the Roman army into the small province of Judea, under his most esteemed officers, with one mission: search, destroy, and burn. Perhaps Bar Kokhva? "60 years had passed since the Romans destroyed Jerusalem and the Temple. Grieving and in pain, the Jews anxiously awaited the opportunity to rebuild the city. Then, in 130 CE, the Roman Emperor Hadrian visited Jerusalem to rebuild the city from its ruins. The Jews were thrilled, until they realized that Hadrian had not come to rebuild Jerusalem. He had come to bury it, and to build on its ruins a pagan Roman city. On the 9th of Av, the Roman governor held the plowing ceremony that marked the establishment of a new Roman colony. Hadrian's decision to build a temple to Jupiter, precisely where the temple stood, caused tremendous turmoil among the Jews. The humiliation was unbearable. Tens of thousands took up arms to defend Jerusalem with their lives. Their charismatic leader would be remembered as one of the fiercest characters in Jewish history, Shimon Bar Kokhva. To the people of Judea, Bar Kokhva was a superhero. They said he would catch catapult stones in mid-flight and kick them back at the Romans' heads. His soldiers could supposedly uproot a tree while riding a galloping horse. But although he became a legend, the details of his life remained obscure. Even his real name was unknown. Until 1952.
Before we continue, 1952. We're sort of at a cliffhanger, and I'm going to get back to this. I promise I'm going to get back to this. I just want to show you a few things. So first of all, in Israeli culture, Bar Kokhva is a legend. This is just a sample of things from Israeli culture and also other things that deal with Bar Kokhva. So there's a series of stamps that's on the left. Some of you may not even know what stamps are. I don't know. But there's a series of stamps called Heroes of Israel, and it has Bar Kokhva with a bow and arrow, which is very much associated with Lag BaOmer. And there's Agadot Bar Kokhva, the legends of Bar Kokhva, and a famous picture. And there's also these other stories which have to do with Bar Kokhva and the lion. Now, Bar Kokhva and the lion was a story that was invented, I think, somewhere around the 1970s. It's a new story, and it's basically made up legends because it's about how much of a hero he was. And there's kids' books about this. There's songs about this. Everybody knows this in Israel. And look, it says Lag BaOmer on the left, and you see a Jewish soldier with a lion. That's Bar Kokhva. What is the source for Bar Kokhva and the lion? Probably only this one thing that was found in one of these caves. And we're going to continue that video really shortly. This is a picture. If it's a picture of you see that there's like a string with a seal that was basically used to close a document. And it has a picture of somebody fighting a lion. This was found in the caves that Bar Kokhva's army was hiding in. So they say this may have been the symbol of Bar Kokhva. But that's it. We don't really know. But in addition to that, I want to show you some things that were found, and we're going to see the video in just a moment. I want to show you where these things were found. So I'm going to take you back to Israel. We are going to jump to the caves in the Judean desert. And one of the things that characterized the Bar Kokhva revolt, sorry, that's not this cave. Sorry, wrong cave. Wrong cave. We'll talk about these caves soon. Is here in the Judean desert next to the Dead Sea, not far from where I'm sitting right now. And in these caves, the Jews were hiding at the very end of the battle, where they took all their valuable things and hid in these caves. Now, one of these caves is called the Cave of Horrors, because when we found it in the 1950s, we found lots of skeletons that look like they were basically killed by the Romans, and they're scared, right? So it's a horrific cave, and we gave them a special burial. You'll see it in the video of Jewish heroes. The other cave is called the Cave of Letters, and that's where in 1952, Yigal Yadin, the Israeli major general, the second Israeli major general, like the head of the army, who's an archaeologist, found the following letters in these caves. You see that there's like holes in the wall. It's very hard to get here. It's a good place to hide. But the Romans were able to find us here too. So I want to show you what was actually found in these caves, and then we'll continue with the cliffhanger in the video. So first of all, we found coins. These are coins from the Great Revolt. And there's also this weight on the right. These are all in the Israel Museum, but we found thousands of these coins. Now, what is the picture on the coins of the Great Rebellion? Look closely. We have on one of them a picture of the temple and maybe one of the temple vessels, and lulav and etrog, the four species used in the holiday of Sukkot, which we're going to see soon, and a weight that says Shimon, the leader or the king, the Nasi of Israel, and the coin says Shimon on one side, and for the liberation of Jerusalem on the other. Now, I want to tell you something incredible. Hold on to your seat, okay? Since the Bar Kokhva revolt until 1952, Nobody knew Bar Kokhva's name. Nobody knew Bar Kokhva's name. They knew him as Bar Kokhva or Ben Kosba, Bar Koziba. Nobody knew what his name was. So when we found these coins, nobody knew who Shimon was. Who is this Shimon on the coins? Who is this Shimon on the weights? Now, a leader, a king, is in charge of the weights, the measurements, and the coins. So who is Shimon the priest, the president of Israel? Nobody knew. Nobody said, oh, that's Bar Kokhva. No, nobody knew. Until in 1952, they found these letters in the Cave of Letters. This letter is written in Hebrew, in modern Hebrew, which it takes a little bit of getting used to reading, but I want to show you what it says. If you read Hebrew, it makes it easier. Shimon ben Kosba. This is a letter written by the Jewish military commander from 1800 years ago. That's incredible, right? The second one, which I'm going to show you in a moment, says also, it's a little harder to read because it's like cursive. Shimon ben Kosba hanasi al Yisrael, from Shimon son of Kosba, the king over Israel. And he's talking about a delivery of shipment of the 4 species for celebrating Sukkot to his soldiers in battle. Now, when Yigal Yadin held this letter, you have to imagine the chills that went down his back when he realized that he is holding a message from the commander of the last Jewish army in history, 1,800 years ago, and I'm the next one, almost 2,000 years later, and I'm holding his letter in my hand. I want you to appreciate the amazing sensation. And with that, we're going to continue the video.
Even his real name was unknown. Until 1952, when the archaeologist Yigael Yadin found caves in the Judean desert to which the last of the rebels had fled. Numerous objects were discovered in the caves, among them a bundle of letters from 1,800 years ago. I sat trembling at my desk in Jerusalem as I gazed at the bundle of ancient papyri in my hand. Carefully, I extracted 2 of them from the bundle. I could not believe my eyes. Shimon bar Kokhva, Nasi, ruler over Israel.
מתוך האגרות האלה אנחנו גילינו קצת על הדמות של בר כוכבא. מצד אחד אנחנו רואים שהוא היה מפקד קשוח, והוא לא היסס לאיים, לשרוף לאנשים בתים או לאסור אותם. מצד שני, אנחנו רואים שהוא גם מאוד דאג את החיילים שלו, גם לאספקה של 4 המינים לחג הסוכות. הוא שולח מכתב לעין גדי שיתנו להם לולבים ואתרוגים, הדסים וערבות.
Civilians were also required to provide food and supplies. A rough, tough hero, sometimes even violent. But Bar Kokhva was perceived by many as the only man who could save the Jewish people in these dire times. Rabbi Akiva, one of the greatest sages of the generation, even proclaimed him the Messiah. Not everyone agreed that Bar Kokhva was the savior the Jews had been waiting for. But the nation joined in the uprising with enthusiasm. Symbols of the revolt were imprinted on thousands of coins. The fight for the redemption of Jerusalem under Shimon Bar Kokhva was underway. Under the Romans' noses, the Jews started making weapons. According to the Roman historian Cassius Dio, the Jews dug escape tunnels and attack tunnels underground, like this one. The fighters emerged from these tunnels, attacked the Roman troops by surprise, and then retreated back into the depths of the earth. The Roman troops were helpless in the face of this new tactic. Even if a Roman soldier could locate the opening to a secret tunnel, he would have to remove his armor, leave his shield, bow, and spear outside, and crawl in with just his sword. Inside the tunnel, Bar Kokhva's troops would be waiting silently with drawn daggers or a heavy rock. Hundreds of such tunnels were dug all over the country. The tactic took the Roman army by surprise and managed to undermine its control of the region.
So what I want to show you, just a moment, it's a little bit gruesome, but I want to show you something really neat. Some of these tunnels that you can actually visit today. So there's a place called Bet Guvrin, which was called Heliotropolis, but Bet Guvrin was a very famous Roman city south of Jerusalem, just so you see where we are. This is Jerusalem, and here we are in Bet Guvrin. And you see that there is a theater here. There's a theater here. There's this like a stadium. I can even jump in for a second so you get an idea. So this is kind of showing you how the Romans would stand here in the seats, and Jewish gladiators would be here, and as they're fighting to the death, they would open up the hatch in the ground, and then a lion or a tiger would come out. It's entertaining for everybody sitting here, but for the people who are forced to fight, not so much fun. But this is one of the things that the Romans would do. Now, here in Bet Guvrin, there are naturally occurring caves in the limestone. You could visit these. They're really, really cool. So in Bet Guvrin, and then there's all these hidden caves. But the point is that Jews prepared for this rebellion by digging tunnels and caves and connecting all these networks to fight against the Romans. So let me give you a couple of examples, and you can actually climb into these. Sometimes you have to get down on your back or your belly and slide in because it's very hard to get in, and it's really cool. So imagine there's Roman soldiers walking around, and they don't know that there's a cave right here because there's a tree growing on top of it. The Jews would attack them and then vanish really, really quickly. And what do you do about it, right? So just look how easy it is to vanish. So, for example, right here, this was right next to the city. There's somebody's house right around it. And the Jews would just attack and then vanish into these covered caves. And the Romans would have a very hard time pursuing them because it's very dangerous to go into these caves. So this is just an example, but this is all over. We have hundreds of tunnels all over Israel. So we were very, very well prepared to attack the Romans. Okay, so let's take a look. We'll continue a little bit more. See a little bit more of this video. Yeah, here we go.
The result was devastating. Tens of thousands were killed. So many Romans were killed in battle that entire units were wiped out. The severity of the situation was expressed by Hadrian in a letter to the Senate in Rome. When reporting on the fighting in Judea, he was forced to omit the standard opening phrase, "If you and your children are in good health, it is well. I and the legions are in good health." Hadrian and his troops were not in good health. Despite the heavy losses, the Roman war machine was unrelenting. Soldiers surrounded the tunnels, set fires at their entrances, and then killed every last fighter one by one. The few surviving fighters fled to caves in the Judean desert, bringing with them their most precious possessions: personal documents, valuable bronze items, talit and tefillin, and keys to the homes they had left behind. But even here, the long arm of the Romans caught up with them. The uprising was crushed. Close to 1,000 villages were burned down, and on the 9th of Av in the year 135 CE, Beitar, the last stronghold, fell, along with the hero on whom the people had hung so many hopes, Bar Kokhva. Hadrian celebrated his victory and commemorated it with a huge monument whose ruins were found at Tel Shalem in the Bet Sha'an Valley. Near these ruins, a bronze statue of the emperor was discovered. It is now on display in the Israel Museum. On the emperor's armor, we see Roman soldiers brutally trampling their enemies. But for Hadrian, that was not enough. Humiliated by the casualties among his troops and convinced that the Jewish faith was the driving force behind the uprising, he declared a war of annihilation against Judaism itself. Circumcision, Sabbath observance, Torah study, shofar blowing, and the eating of matzah on Passover, all the commandments that made the Jewish people unique and gave meaning and identity to their lives, were banned, and anyone who observed them was cruelly executed. Many Jews refused to obey the decrees and preferred to die rather than give up their faith. Among them was Rabbi Akiva. The consequences of the uprising were catastrophic for the Jewish people. Judea was completely destroyed and half its population was killed. Many survivors fled to the Galil to seek refuge among their Jewish brethren there. Jerusalem, the reason for the uprising, was wiped out completely, and a pagan Roman city, Aelia Capitolina, was built on its ruins. On Hadrian's orders, the Jews were barred from living within sight of the city for which they had given their lives. It was a crushing, unequivocal victory.
We are still here today, and he is not, right? So he didn't succeed. Now, one of the things that are really important to understand, I'm going to say that while I take you to where the victory arch was put. One second. The victory arch was found in the Jezreel Valley here in Tel Shalem. It was basically like the Arch of Titus, but it was an Arch of Hadrian to tell everyone, look what happened to Bar Kokhva. It was found here. Of course, the copies of it, whatever remains of it is in the Israel Museum. I'll show you the picture right here. So this is the inscription, and here's the reconstruction of it. And there's a famous statue of Hadrian stepping on a Jewish child. So he made a very big deal about this. It was no small business. Okay. Now, one of the things that Hadrian did, other than religious decrees and renaming Jerusalem and banning Jews from getting near Jerusalem, is he even renamed the entire area, which was called Judea. He called it Palestine. He came up with that name because he figured if I rename it after the ancient Philistines, the Plishtim, which were gone, they were extinct, that would basically destroy the Jewish connection to Judea. So he came up with the name Palestine, which is very relevant for today because that's where the name comes from. So that's all Bar Kokhva revolt and Hadrian. Now let's talk about the last stand. The last stand against the Romans, which was defeated on the 9th of Av and Tisha B'Av, and with that we're going to move on to Bar Yochai, is Beitar. Now this is a map of the excavations in Beitar, but I went through the trouble for you, and I placed that on the actual site. So let's go to Beitar. Here we go, Khirbet El Yahud. It's in the Palestinian territories today. In other words, you can't go there safely, but there have been Jewish excavations here. It's next to the modern-day city of Beitar, but this is the ancient one. It's called Batir. And this area on the top of the hill that's marked in blue is where the Jewish last stand was, where Bar Kokhva was. This is where he was killed. And it's called Khirbet El Yahud, which means the ruins of the Jews. Now, what's going on here is this is the Roman camp. This is these red squares where the Romans set up, and this red line is where the Romans set up a siege wall. So they basically surrounded Beitar for a few years, and finally Beitar was crushed and destroyed on Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, and that's when the Bar Kokhva revolt was suppressed. This yellow line is part of the Roman road from Jerusalem to Beit Guvrin. So that kind of ties together all of that. So in terms of Beitar, I'm just going to show you one of the pictures because I couldn't find it in Google Earth. These are the remains of the Jewish fortifications where we fought. This is it. Okay? Now, in the remaining 10 minutes, we're going to talk about the other student of Rabbi Akiva, whose name is Shimon Bar Yochai. So Rabbi Akiva, of course, was killed during these decrees. He's known as one of the 10 martyrs, or Aseret Harogei Malchut. And here comes Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the other Shimon, who was a student of Rabbi Akiva, who hated the Romans, who the Romans chased after him, they persecuted him, and he hid in a cave. But he had a completely different approach to how Jews are supposed to survive, as opposed to fight against the Romans, which ended up being a disaster in this case. He said there's a different way to survive. And I want to tell you the story of Shimon Bar Yochai. And for that, I'm going to take you to the Galilee, where many of the Jews ran to, where the following story happens. We're going to a place called Peki'in. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai goes to a place called Peki'in, which is a beautiful place. My parents even have a house there. Let's go and show you Peki'in in the Galilee. Peki'in today is a Druze village. The Druze are one of the ethnic minorities that live in Israel. They're not Muslims, they're Druze. That's a different story. And there's a few Jewish homes there. Like I said, my parents have a house here. And in fact, there is a Jewish family here that has never left in 2,000 years.
Why aren't they called Jews?
Not Jews, Druze. Druze.
Different.
It's different. They're Druzi. They are very loyal to Israel. There's many Druze who are top commanders in the army, very patriotic to Israel, and they have their own kind of secret religion. They're an interesting bunch. You could look them up, the Druze. I mean, add a little bit in the description so you can get in the details below. So this is Druze. Now I want to show you, before I jump into Peki'in, see if I could just find some random spot in Peki'in. Let's see what shows up. So we are in the main square of Peki'in. There's a little fountain here. It looks like it's dried out here. You can get ice creams here. There's a Jewish school. I don't even know if it's a Jewish school. There's a school. They're clearly a school, right? This is called the Drew's House restaurant, and there's a famous soap factory called Grandpa Jamila, Safta Jamila. She speaks in Hebrew, and she has several sons who were in the army, and they always had itches from their uniform. So she basically invented a new ingredient of soap made from olive oil, and now she markets it, and she's famous. She's called Safta Jamila, and she makes soaps, and she has a great visitor center. So that's all here in Pekin, just so you know. It's kind of cool. And now let's talk about the cave and the story. So the story goes as follows. In the town of Pekin, if you look carefully at this signs that I took this picture when we filmed some video, I'm going to send you the video afterwards. It says Rashbi Cave. Remember, Rashbi is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and on the right there's a map of old Pekin, and it shows you all the different sites. There's also a Jewish synagogue and all kinds of stuff. The story goes like this. Rabbi Akiva was outspoken. He publicly said mean things about the Romans. What has he said did he say about the Romans? What have the Romans ever done for us? That's what he said about the Romans. So that's where that Monty Python skit in the movie Life of Brian actually comes from. Because it says that Rabbi Akiva was sitting with a bunch of people, and they were all talking about what the Romans did. And one person said, look, they made roads, and they made aqueducts, and they made bridges. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said, the only reason they did that is so they can tax you so when you pass the bridge. It's like going on the Verrazano. It costs you like, what, $17? They make a lot of money off these roads and bridges. They're not doing it for us. They're doing it for themselves. Now, the Romans caught wind of what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said, and they said, off with his head. Find him and kill him. Whoever finds him, dead or alive, right? So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai hid in his attic for a while, and his wife would send him sandwiches. He was hiding it wherever he was hiding, but he realized that his family would be in danger if he was caught. So he and his son Elazar ran away and hid in a cave in Pekin. Now, there's a different version of the story, which is they hid in a cave in Lod, but the bottom line is that they hid in a cave for 12 years. Now, I want to show you what we think maybe is the cave. We don't know 100%. But there's a local tradition in Pekin that says this is the cave. So here it is. From the road, you can actually walk down from that sign that I showed you down to the cave. And there's something you should know when you visit Israel, is that the English in the signs is always messed up. So this sign says Holly Place. It's a little hard to see. Not holy, Holly. But I don't think that they meant the Christmas holly. They just didn't know how to spell. We think this might be the cave. I don't really know, but the cave had a collapse inside it. There was an earthquake, so you can't really go that far into this cave. But this was what we think might be the cave. So it's people come here, they light candles, they pray. It's a thing. It's become a kind of a pilgrimage. Yes, Shira. I'm just letting you know that time is short. So if there's unrelated questions, wait till the end. Okay?
It isn't unrelated.
Okay, so go ahead.
In the cave. You said they were in the cave for 12 years.
Right, we're going to talk about that now.
Then they went out, and then they came back for another
12
year.
months. Right.
Month.
12 years, 12 months. Right. Very good. Very good. So we're going to tell that story and how that relates to Lag BaOmer. This is the shorter part of the story. So hopefully we'll finish. I know we're a bit over time, but let's say in about 5 minutes. Okay. Should be finished in about 5 minutes, give or take. So this is the cave in Pekin. Now the story goes that they were hiding in a cave for 12 years. So what did they eat and drink? So there's several versions of the story because, again, it's a very ancient story. Some say that there was a fig tree. Some say there was a carob tree, or maybe there was a bit of both. Figs and carobs, which are fruit that can last for a long time if they're dried. And there was a little stream. And that's it. That's pretty much all they ate. And we have a story that their students used to try to visit them and learn from them because he was a great rabbi, but they would be caught by the Romans who knew exactly who the students were. So they would take a bow and arrow and say, hey, no, we're just going hunting. You see, we have a bow and arrow. Doing, we're just going hunting. So that's the other side of Lag BaOmer, where people celebrate Lag BaOmer with the connection to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai with bows and arrows and bonfires, as opposed to Bar Kokhva with the bows and arrows as the rebellion against the Romans, right? So they're hiding here for 12 years. Now think about this. 12 years in a cave. How soon do you run out of what to talk about? Right? There's no Netflix, no Hulu, no Amazon Prime, no internet, no books. What do you do for 12 years in a cave other than lose your mind, right? What do you do? So what this story tells us that they did, it's a story that's brought in the Talmud, it's an ancient Jewish story, is that they studied Torah. But once you go through everything that you've memorized in Torah, you sort of like, okay, I'm done. Like, how many times can you do the same thing again? Right? So they start delving into the deeper meaning of things and thinking about the universe and like spiritual things. And basically, this is what they're doing for 12 years. They're not going to work. They don't have a job. They're not working the land, right? They're completely disconnected from the world, which means that after 12 years, they've basically forgotten what it means to live like a normal human being in the world, a person who needs a job, who needs to go to work, they've just lost touch with that. So after 12 years, they put on their clothes, like they heard that the emperor died, that's the long story short. They put on their clothes, they go out from this miraculous reality in which they're like living in other dimensions. Like, I mean, like they're not involved in this world anymore. And they come out to the world. And the way the story is told, I mean, I don't think this means it literally, but like the way the story is told is they looked at people going to work, going to their farm, going to their field, and they just blew everything up. Like they looked at it and it blew up. That basically kind of means like they just didn't understand, what are people doing? Like, this is a waste of time. And a heavenly voice comes out and says, did you just come out of your cave to blow up my world? Get out of here. Go back to your cave. So they go back to their cave for like 12 months. And they basically said, why 12 months? Because according to Jewish tradition, if anybody needs to be cleansed to go through hell, not the Christian idea of hell, the Jewish idea of hell, the worst case scenario is you'll be there for 12 months and then you're done. So, well, let's say we're going to hell. 12 months is enough to that hell of the cave. And then they come out into the world again. So that's the way the story is told. I mean, I'm not getting into the literal or whatever. It's a fun story. And the story ends like this. This is our ending of the story. They come out after 12 months, and at this point, they've relaxed a little bit. Shimon Bar Yochai is a lot older than his son. He has a lot more experience, and Rabbi Elazar like wants to blow everything up, and he unblows everything up. That's how it tells the story. It's like basically his son is still very hot under the collar, like, what are people doing, wasting their lives and involved? And he's like, relax, it's okay. Now here's the story. It happens to be Friday. It's almost Shabbat. It's almost the Sabbath, and they're walking along, and they see this farmer running with a branch of myrtle in his hands. Now, as try as I might, AI was not able to put the branches in the farmer's hand and not in Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's son's hand, so I gave up, but this is my best shot with AI, okay? So they look at the guy, and they say, where are you going? Like, well, I'm running to my house. It's the Sabbath. So what is this in your hand? What is this myrtle? He said, oh, it's to honor the Sabbath because it smells good. So why do you need two of them? Why not just one? And then he says to them, well, the reason I need two is because the Sabbath is mentioned twice in the Torah and the Ten Commandments. There's once where it says Shamor et Yom HaShabbat, observe or protect the Sabbath. And then the other is Zachor et Yom HaShabbat, be mindful of the Sabbath. Shamor v'Zachor, that's two. That's why people light two candles on the Sabbath. So he said, that's why I'm having two branches of myrtle. And then Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai tells his son, you see, these people are attached to the deeper meaning of things. They are connected in their lives to the Torah in their own meaningful way. That's good enough. Two of us are good enough for the entire world. We can be in our own cave, in our own, mystical world. Let these people live their lives. They really care. And this is where our story ends, because the story ends with the death of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai dies on Lag BaOmer. And he is buried in a place called Meron, which is in the Galilee. Here's Mount Meron, which is today a military base because it's high up there. Just a moment, Shira, okay? And right at the foot of Mount Meron is a neighborhood. And in this neighborhood called Meron, this blue domed building is the fancy building around the tomb of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. I'm going to jump inside it for a moment. And every Lag BaOmer, except for recently because of the war in the north, thousands of people come here. Thousands of people come here. They light bonfires and they sing songs about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who showed us a path to a deeper way to connect to Torah, and yet a place for everyone to connect to Torah. So this is the cave of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and finally there's a synagogue here right outside, which some say is the synagogue that he built, or maybe he prayed in. We don't know. We know that it's roughly from the time of the Second Temple, and it was destroyed in an earthquake in the year 300 or something, and that's it. So I actually filmed a video here, and I'm going to send you the links to all the videos that I made about Bar Kokhva, Bar Yochai, and all that fun stuff. But the bottom line is, I'm going to wrap up with this, is that there were two students of Rabbi Akiva. Oh, here's a picture in Meron, a picture that we took when we were making the video. So going up to the synagogue, that's one of the guys who did the film. And then there's a little buggy that says the holy sites. It's kind of fun. Now I'm going to wrap up, okay? Two Shimons in a cave. Shimon Bar Kokhva and Shimon Bar Yochai both hid from the Romans in the cave. Both had very different approaches of how to deal with the Romans. One said, we need to fight them. And the other one, who did not like the Romans, said, we need to find a unique place for every Jew in the way that they connect to their lives with the deeper meaning of things. And that's the way to move forward. And today in Israel, we have two Lag BaOmers. We have Shimon Bar Yochai and Shimon Bar Kokhva. We have a revival of Jewish army, a Jewish military, fighting, defending ourselves to survive like we are today. And we also have an entirely different world that deals with Torah and deeper meanings that are kind of disconnected from this world sometimes. But both of them are brothers, and they need to come out of the cave and embrace and reunite all of Israel. That's the story of two Shimons in a cave. Thank you all very much.